Welcome to the Power Book of Podcasts. Unlock your potential with powerful book summaries that inspire personal growth and broaden your understanding of the world. Each week, we explore life-changing ideas, from leadership to mindset strategies to keys for happiness and success. Learn actionable insights to apply in your daily life. Join our growing community of thinkers and seekers. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button now. It's time to supercharge your mind with the Power Book of Podcasts.
Okay, so today let's dive into something pretty interesting, China.
All right.
Specifically, we're going to explore how China's economic transformation is kind of shaking up the global power balance.
Yeah.
We're using Martin Jacques' book, When China Rules the World, as our guide for this.
Great book.
And trust me, this is going to challenge some assumptions.
It will.
And leave you with some serious food for thought.
Lots to think about with this topic.
So,
what's really fascinating about China is that, we often think of modernity as a purely Western concept, right? A model that everyone else kind of aspires to.
Right.
But as we kind of dig into China's story, you'll see that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's like we're programmed to think there's only one path to progress.
Yeah.
But Jacques paints a very different picture.
He does. And to understand where China is headed, I think we need to go back to a period they call the Century of Humiliation.
Okay.
From 1850 to 1950.
Yeah.
It was a time of foreign intervention and occupation, and it really had just a devastating impact on China's economy.
Jacques actually points out that China's per capita GDP in 1950 was lower than it was in 1820.
Wild.
That's crazy considering the Industrial Revolution was in full swing in the West during those years.
Yeah.
Why was China left behind while the West kind of surged ahead?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's not as simple as saying the West was inherently superior or anything like that.
Right.
There were a number of specific historical contingencies that gave the West a distinct advantage.
Okay.
For example, access to New World resources and abundant coal allowed them to really kind of fuel the Industrial Revolution. Right. And overcome resource constraints that hindered China's growth.
So the West was just lucky.
Well, I mean, luck certainly played a part, but it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
The British and later other Western European states were actively supportive of industrialization in ways that the Chinese state wasn't. Colonization and frequent wars within Europe also provided Western Europe with key assets like raw materials and military capacity.
So it's like a confluence of factors that kind of propelled the West forward.
Exactly. And this period of Western dominance had really profound implications for China.
Okay.
Between 1800 and 1950, its economy essentially stagnated.
Wow.
To put it in perspective, according to the economic historian Angus Madison, China's GDP barely increased from 1820 to 1913 and even fell by 1950.
Wow, that's a stark contrast to the West's exponential growth during that time.
Huge difference.
Just no wonder they call it the Century of Humiliation.
Yeah, it's a pretty loaded term, right? And it speaks volumes about how China views that period of its history. But I think it's crucial to understanding their current ambitions.
Right.
And their determination to kind of reclaim their place on the world stage.
Okay, so how did China manage to turn things around?
That's where things get really interesting.
Okay.
After the People's Republic of China was established in 1949, they faced a monumental task of restoring the country's unity and kickstarting its economy.
Right.
And that's where the story of China's explosive growth begins.
This is the part that always blows my mind.
It's wild.
From 1978 onwards, China's economic transformation has been nothing short of phenomenal.
It's incredible.
Jacques highlights that between 2002 and 2005 alone, they contributed a third of the world's growth in real output.
It's staggering to think about. And in 2003, their per capita GDP was still only around $1,000.
Right.
Imagine the impact as that number continues to rise.
And it's not just about these abstract economic figures either. Think about how much cheaper things like clothes and shoes are now compared to a decade ago.
For sure.
We're all experiencing the China price firsthand.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Right.
China's emergence as the workshop of the world has really driven down prices for manufactured goods globally.
Yeah.
It's a direct result of their reliance on low-end manufacturing, which leverages their vast reserves of cheap labor.
So we're benefiting from affordable goods.
Yeah.
But it raises some questions about the conditions for Chinese workers.
For sure.
Is this model sustainable in the long run?
Right.
Can China shift towards higher value production?
Those are crucial questions, and we'll delve into those complexities a little bit later on.
Okay.
But for now, Let's shift our focus to something even more intriguing.
Okay.
The potential return of the tributary system.
Okay, now this is where things start to get really interesting.
Yeah.
Historically, East Asia operated under a system where China was at the center.
Right.
As China regains its economic might, could we see a resurgence of this system?
Jacques certainly thinks it's a possibility.
Wow.
And, it's not just theoretical.
Right.
Consider China's recent diplomatic efforts in Africa and Latin America.
Yeah.
Securing access to raw materials.
It's like they're laying the groundwork for a new kind of world order one where China sets the rules.
Potentially.
Yeah. Wow.
And this potential shift extends beyond economics.
Okay.
Chinese culture is gaining traction globally as well.
It is.
Think about the popularity of Chinese cuisine.
Yeah.
Traditional medicine.
Yeah. It's everywhere.
It is. And speaking of cultural influence, there's a fascinating tidbit in Jacques' book about the origins of golf.
Okay.
Did you know there's evidence suggesting it might have originated in China?
Really?
Yeah. He mentions a Ming Dynasty scroll depicting a game remarkably similar to golf.
That's wild.
It really challenges our assumptions about where certain traditions and inventions come from.
It's mind-blowing to think how much we might have gotten wrong about the flow of cultural influence throughout history.
Yeah.
But let's bring this back to the present.
Uh-huh.
We've talked about China's economic dominance and its expanding cultural influence, but what about its relationship with the West?
That's where things get even more complex.
Okay.
And it's a topic we'll explore in depth in the next part of our deep dive.
Looking forward to it. This is really interesting stuff.
It is fascinating.
I'm glad we're doing this deep dive.
Me too.
Okay, so we'll pick this back up next time.
Sounds good.
Talk to you then.
All right.
Bye. Okay, so we left off talking about China's relationship with the West,
Right.
particularly the U.S. It's a topic that kind of dominates headlines, but
It does.
Jacques presents a really nuanced perspective that I hadn't considered before.
Yeah, I think the relationship between China and the West, especially the U.S.,
Right.
is often portrayed in very simplistic terms.
It is.
But it's far more intricate than that.
I mean, it's easy to fall into the trap of seeing it as a zero-sum game, right?
Right.
Like, if China wins, the West loses, and vice versa.
Yeah, that's the narrative we often hear.
Yeah.
But it's a dangerous oversimplification, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
The reality is that China's relationship with the West is a complex mix of cooperation, competition, and strategic maneuvering.
Right.
And to understand it fully, we need to kind of delve into how China sees the U.S. in particular.
Jacques makes a really interesting point about this.
Yeah.
He argues that China has a remarkably deep understanding of the U.S.
They do.
Its political system, its culture, its strengths, and its weaknesses.
And that understanding has been cultivated for decades.
Right.
It's a strategic priority for them.
It's almost like they've been studying us intently.
Yeah.
While we've been kind of oblivious.
There's some truth to that, I think.
Yeah.
The U.S., despite its global dominance, often has a surprisingly superficial understanding of China.
Which makes me wonder, does this asymmetry in knowledge create a potential imbalance in the relationship?
Potentially.
Could it lead to miscalculations or misunderstandings?
Absolutely. That's one of the key risks that Jacques highlights.
Okay.
China's approach to the U.S. is based on a long-term strategic perspective.
Right.
That's often at odds with the U.S.'s focus on short-term gains.
So while the U.S. might see China as a rival or even a threat, China sees the U.S. as a necessary partner, at least for now.
Yeah.
It's like they're playing different games with different objectives.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. And this difference in perspective is rooted in their vastly different historical experiences.
Well, of course.
And cultural values.
That makes sense, but how does this play out in practical terms?
Right.
What are some concrete examples of how this difference in perspective shapes their interactions?
Well, one example is China's approach to trade negotiations.
Okay.
They're incredibly patient and strategic, willing to play the long game, whereas the U.S. often wants quick results.
Yeah, we're not known for our patience.
No, not really. And this long-term perspective extends to other areas as well, right?
Like their approach to diplomacy and their investments in developing countries.
Exactly. They're thinking decades ahead, laying the groundwork for a future where they have a much more prominent role on the world stage.
And this brings up another interesting point. Jacques argues that China's relationship with Europe is quite different from its relationship with the U.S.
Yeah, it's much less contentious and has flown under the radar somewhat.
Interesting. Which is kind of ironic considering it was the European power, starting with Britain, that colonized China during what they now call the Century of Humiliation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So why the difference in dynamics?
Yeah. Why is that?
Well, since World War II, Europe has largely retreated from its global ambitions,
Okay.
focusing more on its regional role within the European Union.
Okay.
They've handed the baton to the U.S., so to speak.
So Europe is no longer a major player in East Asia.
Right.
And that's reflected in their relatively low-key relationship with China.
Exactly. And with the exception of the euro, discussions about Europe's global role tend to revolve around what's called normative power.
Oh, okay. Break that down for me. What exactly does normative power mean?
It essentially means promoting standards and values through international institutions,
Okay.
rather than through hard power or military might.
So they're more focused on setting rules and shaping the global agenda than on projecting military force?
Precisely. But even though Europe has taken a back seat in terms of hard power, its attitude towards China still matters.
Yeah.
You know, Europe has an economy comparable in size to the U.S.
Right.
and remains a key part of the Western alliance.
So how has Europe responded to China's rise? Have they been more welcoming than the U.S.?
They've been pragmatic, driven primarily by economic interests.
Okay.
Europe has engaged with China on trade and investment, while also expressing concerns about human rights and intellectual property theft.
So it's a balancing act.
Yeah.
Just like the U.S.'s relationship with China, a mix of cooperation and competition.
Very similar. But here's where things get interesting.
Okay.
China's relationship with the U.S., despite all the talk of cooperation, is often a subject of intense debate and controversy within the U.S.
Meaning there's no clear consensus on how to deal with China.
Exactly. But in China,
Okay.
their relationship with the U.S. is remarkably consistent and strategic. It's been a cornerstone of their foreign policy for decades.
So no fiery speeches or public spats denouncing the U.S.?
No, they've been incredibly disciplined and pragmatic.
Wow.
They understand that a stable relationship with the U.S. is crucial for their economic growth and their long-term ambitions.
It's fascinating how different the internal dynamics are.
It is.
The U.S. seems much more reactive and emotionally charged in its approach to China, while China's playing the long game.
That's a keen observation, and this difference in approach stems in part from the legacy of Deng Xiaoping, the architect of China's economic reforms.
Yeah, he's the one who famously said, "Hide your strength, bide your time."
Exactly. He prioritized a peaceful international environment so China could focus on its development.
Right.
Maintaining good relations with the U.S. was a key part of that strategy, and it's remained a core tenet of Chinese foreign policy ever since.
So it seems like understanding this long-term perspective is crucial to understanding China's actions on the world stage.
Absolutely. And this brings us to another key player in the global power dynamic.
Okay, so we've talked about China and the West.
Right.
But what about India? It's often compared to China, right? They both have massive populations and growing economies.
Yeah, they're often grouped together.
Yeah.
And they do share some similarities. Together, they account for almost 40% of the world's population.
Wow.
And they're both undergoing really dramatic economic transformations.
Right.
But their relationship is incredibly complex.
Well, the Himalayas are a pretty imposing barrier between them.
Right.
Both literally and figuratively.
Exactly. They're not just a geographical divide.
Yeah.
But a cultural and political chasm as well.
Right.
Despite their shared size and economic potential, their histories, cultures, and political systems are vastly different.
So where do we even begin to unpack all of that?
Right.
What are some of the most striking differences between China and India?
Well, for starters, China has the longest continuous history of any nation.
Wow.
While India, as we know it today, is a much more recent creation.
Okay.
Largely formed during the British Raj.
So China's identity is deeply rooted in its long history as a civilization state.
Yeah.
Whereas India's identity is more fragmented.
Right.
Shaped by its diverse cultural and linguistic groups.
Yes. And this difference in historical experience has had a profound impact on their political development.
Okay.
India is the world's largest democracy.
Right.
A testament to its ability to accommodate diverse perspectives and forge a unified nation from its many parts.
While China, with its long history of centralized power, has followed a very different path.
Exactly. Their authoritarian model, as we discussed earlier, is focused on maintaining stability and promoting rapid economic growth, often at the expense of individual liberties.
So we have two vastly different models of development playing out on a grand scale.
We do.
It's like a real-world experiment with profound implications for the future of global order.
And their long-disputed border adds another layer of complexity to their relationship.
Yeah, of course.
You know, there have been armed conflicts in the past, and the potential for future clashes remains a constant concern.
It's a reminder that despite all the talk of globalization,
Right.
geography still matters.
It does.
Especially when it comes to power dynamics.
Absolutely. But it's not just about territorial disputes.
Right.
China and India are also competing economically, vying for resources and global influence.
Which makes sense given their size and their ambitions, but is it all about competition?
Right.
Or is there potential for cooperation between them as well?
There's certainly potential for cooperation, particularly in areas like trade and infrastructure development.
Okay.
They both recognize the benefits of working together on certain issues.
But it's a delicate balancing act, right?
It is.
They need to find a way to manage their rivalry while also exploring opportunities for collaboration.
Exactly. And this relationship is further complicated by the involvement of other major players, like the United States.
Right. The U.S. has been actively courting India as a counterweight to China's growing influence. It's like a geopolitical chess match playing out on a global scale.
That's a great way to put it. And the outcome of this match is far from certain.
Right.
The choices that China and India make in the coming years will have a profound impact on the global balance of power.
So we've covered a lot of ground here.
Yeah, we have.
China's complex relationship with the West, its contrasting approach to the U.S. and Europe, and its rivalry with India. It's clear that China's rise is reshaping the global landscape in profound ways, but what does this all mean for the average person?
That's a crucial question.
Yeah.
And it's one we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive.
So we've been talking about these massive shifts in the global landscape.
Yeah.
China's rise, its complex relationships with the West and India. It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot.
But, you know, I keep coming back to this question. What does this all mean for us, for everyday people?
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
It's easy to get lost in the geopolitical abstractions.
All right.
But the truth is, China's rise is already affecting your life in countless ways.
Okay, so how exactly? Give me some concrete examples.
Okay, well, think back to the China price we discussed.
Right.
You know, the influx of affordable goods from China has given consumers worldwide more buying power.
Yeah.
That's a tangible impact on your wallet.
So cheaper clothes, electronics, pretty much everything.
Wow.
I can definitely see that. But are there downsides to this?
There are trade-offs, for sure.
Okay.
While consumers benefit from lower prices, the shift in manufacturing to China has also led to job losses in developed countries.
Right.
It's a complex issue with both winners and losers.
So it's not as simple as saying it's good or bad. It's creating opportunities for some while displacing others.
Exactly. And it's not just manufacturing jobs that are affected.
Okay.
China's growing economic clout is impacting the service sector as well, with Chinese companies expanding their global reach.
So the competition is heating up.
It is.
And it's coming from all angles.
Yeah.
What does this mean for someone entering the workforce today?
Right.
What skills will be most valuable in this new global landscape?
Adaptability, creativity, and a global mindset will be essential.
Okay.
The ability to think critically, solve problems, and communicate effectively across cultures will be highly sought after.
So it's not just about technical skills anymore. It's about being able to navigate a world where the rules are constantly changing.
Precisely. And this brings us back to the broader question of how the West, particularly the U.S., will adapt to this new reality where they're no longer the sole superpower.
It's the question everyone's asking, right?
Yeah.
Is this an inevitable clash of civilizations?
That's certainly one possibility, especially given the deep cultural differences between China and the West.
Yeah.
The U.S., long accustomed to being the dominant force on the world stage, might find it difficult to adjust to a world where it has to share power with China.
And China, with its growing sense of confidence and its long history as a civilization state, might be less willing to play by rules set by the West.
Exactly. But it's not a foregone conclusion that we're headed for conflict.
Yeah.
There's also the potential for a more cooperative, multipolar world where China and the West find ways to coexist and even collaborate on shared challenges.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Yes.
There's still hope for diplomacy and finding common ground.
Yes.
But what would that actually look like?
It would require a significant shift in mindset, both in the West and in China.
Okay.
The West needs to acknowledge China's growing power and influence.
Right.
And be willing to engage with it on more equal terms.
And China would need to be more transparent and responsive to international concerns, particularly regarding human rights and intellectual property.
Yes, building trust and understanding will be crucial for avoiding conflict and creating a more stable and prosperous world for everyone.
Right.
But it won't be easy.
Yeah.
There are significant challenges ahead.
Like what are some of the biggest hurdles we need to overcome?
Well, one of the most pressing challenges is economic inequality. You know, China's rapid growth has lifted millions out of poverty. But it's also created a widening gap between the rich and poor.
Right.
This growing disparity could lead to social unrest and instability, both within China and globally.
Yeah, that's a problem that's not unique to China, though, right? We're seeing rising inequality in many parts of the world.
That's true. But the scale of China's economy and its global influence magnifies the potential consequences.
Right.
And then there's the environmental impact of China's growth.
Of course.
Its reliance on coal and other fossil fuels has made it the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases.
And climate change is a global threat that requires global cooperation.
Exactly.
So that's a huge hurdle.
It is.
But are there any bright spots? Any reasons to be optimistic about the future?
Absolutely.
Okay.
China's rise also presents tremendous opportunities.
In what way?
Its economic dynamism and its technological advancements could drive innovation and help us find new solutions to global challenges.
So it's not just about competition. There's potential for collaboration as well.
Precisely. China has already made significant strides in areas like renewable energy and sustainable development.
Okay.
And its growing global influence could be leveraged to promote peace and cooperation.
So it's a mixed bag with both risks and rewards. The future is still very much unwritten.
Exactly. The choices that China and the West make in the coming years will determine whether we head towards a more conflict-ridden world or a more cooperative one.
Well, that sounds like we all need to stay informed and engaged.
We do.
We can't just sit back and watch this unfold passively.
He can't. I think this deep dive has given you a foundation for understanding the complexities of China's rise and its impact on the world.
It has.
But the journey of understanding is ongoing.
It's like we've just scratched the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore and learn.
There is. And as you continue to explore, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
As China's influence expands into every aspect of our lives, how will you respond? Will you embrace the change, resist it, or find a way to navigate it? The choice is ultimately yours.
That's a powerful question to ponder. Thanks for taking us on this deep dive. It's given me a lot to think about.
It's been my pleasure. The more we understand China, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities of this new era.
Couldn't agree more. Thanks again.
You're welcome.